decided to do my paper on the anti-lynching movement. This movement originated from whites trying to control the African American population. Lynching was a form of terrorizing African Americans into submission so they wouldn't try to ask for equal rights or gain power. One event that really stuck out to me was the lynching of Emmett Till. He was a 14-year-old boy who was brutally beaten, lynched, and thrown into the Mississippi River because he was accused of whistling at a white woman. One social problem was Ida B. Wells was a very well-known leader for the anti-lynching movement. She tried to legalize lynching, but on the way she faced several troubles and threats. The leaders of the movement were Emmett Till's mother. After he was lynched, his body was unrecognizable, especially being in the Mississippi River for a couple of days, but she decided to have it an open casket funeral just to show what lynching did to a human and how inhumane it was. Ida B. Wells was a journalist for the movement. She traveled internationally and nationally trying to form allies. She also tried to get higher authority to jump on board with getting lynching illegalized. Some of the major issues, Ida B. Wells received death threats if she returned home after internationally traveling. Someone burned her office down with all the documentations of lynchings and unequal treatment. She was also thrown out of streetcars just for being an African American. One of the demands is the grandfather clause. It allowed illiterate whites to vote, but African Americans had to pass a test in order to vote. The actions that were taken by the organizations were they set up several protests. They asked all the protesters to wear black in order to honor the lynching victims. Little shirt buttons were sold to raise money for the NAACP. They did illegal demonstrations of lynchings. They showed the process of once the white mob kidnapped the African American and what led up all the way until the African American's death. They also did economical boycotts. If they weren't allowed somewhere, they would just go in there anyways, like for a restaurant, for example. If it was whites only, they would go and have a seat at the bar. The changes that came about due to the social movement were a bill to honor Emmett Till. This bill would fine or send people to jail for life if they had intentions or participated in lynching-like activities. The Justice for Victims of Lynching Act of 2018, which just came out about a couple years ago, recognizes all the lynching deaths and apologized publicly for it. There wasn't really a known social worker during this time. They considered Ida B. Wells to be the closest thing to a social worker because it wasn't her job to advocate for the rights of these people, but she stepped up and did it anyways. And she also documented everything so we could have that for today and know what doesn't need to happen again. I chose this movement because it was really hard for me to believe that innocent people were treated so poorly and discriminated against just because of the color of their skin. I also chose this movement because I really couldn't believe that they just now came out with an act to apologize just a couple years ago.